Welcome. It is Eric Erickson here across the United States of America. If you text Eric, Erick, to 33777, you can get the show notes, the live stream, the podcast, so much more. You should subscribe to our YouTube channel as we're trying to grow it. We're on Rumble as well, all of it EW Erickson. The New York Times has finally caught up to where I have been for some time. I feel vindicated in that the liberal media is finally where I have been, and I have been where I have been because I know people. If you're a regular listener of the program, you will have heard me over the last month talk about how this administration is re-envisioning our foreign policy away from global dominance and leadership into spheres of influence. What do I mean by spheres of influence? If you go back to the 1800s, actually, you know what? Go back to the 1500s. Let's go all the way back to the 1500s. Spain and Portugal, allegedly with the blessing of the Pope, divided the world. If you watch the show Shogun, which I highly recommend on Hulu, Disney Plus, I think on FX as well. Shogun is one of the better TV shows of the last several years. It's based on the very famous book Shogun, which had been a movie or mini series in the early 1980s. The show is way better than the original mini series, and it's about a British sailor on a Dutch vessel who is in search of Japan. There are rumors of Japan, and they travel west from Europe. They sail around South America, across the Pacific. By the time they get to Japan, just about everybody on the ship is dead except for a handful. And of those, the Japanese kill a good portion of them. But the one sailor actually makes it off over time, learns Japanese. It's based mildly on some truth. And the reason that these sailors were in search of Japan is because it was on no map. The Portuguese knew where Japan was. The Catholic Church knew where Japan was. The Protestants were not allowed to know. The Spanish and the Portuguese had divided the world. You know, one of the coolest stories, I think, is in the early 1500s when the Portuguese land in the southern tip of India. They bring Catholic priests with them to share the gospel, and the people there already knew it. They already had some early scripture. They didn't have the whole Bible. It's very early scripture. Some of the early translations or early copies of the Gospel of Mark were found in southern India. Why? Because the Apostle Thomas, Doubting Thomas, made it all the way to southern India before he died. And so when the Catholics get off the ship to begin to evangelize in southern India, they're like, the Apostle Thomas, here's his grave. Brought a copy of the Gospel of Mark. And it was affirming to a lot of people that early copies of Christian letters had made it as far as India. I mean, you already had a developed church. Now, it didn't have the Nicene Creed, it didn't have all this sort of stuff, but it was familiar enough. They had it. It was a small but very persecuted group. And the Portuguese continued along the way to Hong Kong and finally to Japan, and they had divided the world, and the Protestant part of the world was not allowed to know. Now, fast forward into the 1800s. We've had multiple wars. We've gone through Napoleon. We've come into the modern Westphalia system of nations, and the great powers divide up the world. The empires divide the world. The Russians have a sphere of influence. The Austro-Hungarian Empire has a sphere of influence. The French have a sphere of influence. The Belgians have a sphere of influence, albeit small. The British, of course, have an empire on which the sun doesn't set. It's the most globally expansive empire. But the British Empire is having fiscal trouble. In the 1800s, the British are overextended. And what the British decide to start doing, because they're overextended, they've come through a very messy war with France that spilled over into the War of 1812. You've had the Revolutionary War with the United States. The French and the Spanish have essentially worked together against Protestant Great Britain. And what the British decide to start doing is play off of each other. The British, for a time, were very good friends with the French. And then as the French get a little bit too strong, they start shifting their allegiances more towards the Spanish, who get a little too strong. So the British go towards the Austro-Hungarian Empire, get a little too strong. They go to the Russians, get a little too strong. They go to the French, get a little too strong. Go to the Spanish, get a little too strong. Go to the Germans, get a little too strong. Go to the Russians, get a little used to on and on and on and on. And the British were able to play for over 100 years, basically. The British were able to play alliances off each other to maintain British hegemony as best they could at a time of British financial crisis and their global power waning. This is the New York Times today. Now, I have for weeks, for months, been explaining this to you that this has been my theory. Edward Wong covers U.S. foreign policy. He's the author of a new book on China. He reported this article from Washington and from a trip in the Western Hemisphere with Secretary of State Marco Rubio. That's the description at the beginning. For President Trump, any time is a good time for deal making, but never more so than now with the leaders of China and Russia. Last week, Mr. Trump said he wanted to normalize commerce with Russia, appearing to lessen the pressure on Moscow to settle its war with Ukraine, and he is trying to limit the fallout from his own global trade war by urging China's leader to call him. We all want to make deals, Mr. Trump said in a recent interview with Time, but I am this giant store. It's a giant, beautiful store, and everybody wants to go shopping there. Mr. Trump may have something even bigger in mind involving Russia and China, and it would be the ultimate deal. His actions and statements suggest he might be envisioning a world in which each of the three so called great powers, the United States, China, and Russia, dominate its part of the globe. Some foreign policy analysts say it would be a throwback to a 19th century style of imperial rule. Mr. Trump has said he wants to take Greenland from Denmark, annex China, and reestablish American control of the Panama Canal. Those bids to extend U.S. dominance in the Western Hemisphere are the clearest signs yet of his desire to create a sphere of influence in the nation's backyard. He has criticized allies and talked about withdrawing U.S. troops from around the globe. This could benefit Russia and China, which seek to diminish American security presences in Europe and Asia. Mr. Trump often praises President Putin of Russia and Xi of China as strong and smart men who are his close friends. To that end, Mr. Trump has been trying to formalize Russian control of some Ukrainian territory and American access to Ukraine minerals as part of a potential peace deal that critics say would effectively carve up Ukraine, similar to what great powers did in the Age of Empires. Mr. Trump and Mr. Putin spoke about Ukraine in a 2-hour phone call last week. Monica Duffy Tutt, a professor of international politics at Tufts University's Fletcher School, said the leaders of the United States, Russia, and China are all striving for an imaginary past that was freer and more glorious. Commanding and extending spheres of influence appears to restore a fading sense of grandeur. The term spheres of influence originated at the Berlin Conference of 1884-85, in which European powers adopted a formal plan to carve up Africa. Some close observers of Mr. Trump, including officials from his first administration, caution against thinking his actions and statements are strategic. While Mr. Trump may have strong, long held attitudes about a handful of issues, notably immigration and trade, he does not have a vision of a world order, they argue. Yet there are signs that Mr. Trump and perhaps some of his aides are thinking in the manner that emperors once did when they conceived of spheres of influence. Now, here's the thing. I think the New York Times is on to this in large part because, well, um, I think it's an accurate assessment. Donald Trump wants to carve up the world in spheres of influence with China and Russia. I do think he wants to. I think the New York Times article is right that the close observers of Mr. Trump, including officials from his first administration, caution against thinking his actions and statements are strategic. He does not have a vision of a world order. He doesn't. But J.D. Vance does, and Marco Rubio does. And if you listen to J.D. Vance is a very big proponent of reining the United States in. Essentially, that we can't be all things to all people anymore. We don't have the money, we don't have the resources. We should have Fortress America with our sphere of influence in the Western Hemisphere, possibly some in Europe and Africa. And otherwise, Russia and China can fight it out. But here's the problem, there's a miscalculation here by those who view it this way. Russia and China are now allies. There is this mythology within the United States, always lagging behind, that Russia and China are competitors. Historically, yes, they have been, but friends of enemy of our enemies are our friends. The Russians and the Chinese view the United States as their enemy. They become and they've begun collaborating. The Russians are now teaching the Chinese submarine tactics. The Russians' entire tactical database for submarine warfare is based on confronting the United States. The Russians are now teaching the Chinese tactical submarine warfare, which means they're teaching the Chinese to combat the United States. The Russians would not be teaching the Chinese tactical submarine warfare if the Russians weren't allies with the Chinese. And the fact that they're able to learn from each other now, something that wasn't possible 15 years ago, suggests their alliance has evolved. So if the president really wants to divide the world into spheres of influence, it's going to be two spheres of influence. It's not going to be three. And we're going to be the minority. There are ways for the United States to look to the British system in the 1800s and realize a more thoughtful deployment of resources is worth it. So, for example, in Africa right now, we are telling African nations they're going to have to cover more of their own costs to fight back against Islamic radicalism. Islamic radicalism remains a really big threat, but we're pulling back some resources from Africa. Part of the reason we're pulling back resources is because the Russians and the Chinese have collaborated in kicking the United States out of some countries, and they've now taken our bases. So we're reducing our footprint, but that's allowing Islamic radicalism to fester. The biggest issue for the United States is our fiscal recklessness. If we're not going to really cut entitlements and reform entitlements, we're not going to be able to be the leader of the world. The problem is if we go back to a sphere of influence, China's not going to cede the Western Hemisphere to us. It's a pipe dream to believe they are. The Chinese are looking to get a stronghold into Haiti right now and the Southern Caribbean. The Chinese are actively wooing partners in the Southern Caribbean so that they can build a naval base within the Caribbean. That would be an actual national security threat to the United States if they did it, and they're trying to pull it off. They've been parking ships in Cuba. They're building up spy relay stations in Cuba, very near Florida. Well, there are red flags around the world, and I just don't know that anyone in Washington right now is really paying as much attention as they need to be. There are all sorts of red flags out there right now about what's happening. And I personally think that I understand the reason those in the White House want to go with a sphere of influence model. But at the same time, I also think it is a very, very naive thing for this administration to be pursuing, because I actually think that we need to be leading the world and not just a portion of the world, in large part because the Chinese and the Russians, they're not going to give us a pass. They're not going to allow us to exercise some level of leadership across the global stage. They want to beat us across the global world stage. And we need to recognize the fact that no other country can take them on. So we need to get our fiscal house in order and build up our military and prepare for what is coming, because what is coming is going to be China and Russia working together against us and our allies. So maybe we need to stop burning bridges with our allies.